Thank you very much. And thank you to Teaching House for inviting me to do this. It's obviously an honor to be in any presentation with Jeremy Harmer. I told Lizzie I feel a little bit like I'm opening for the Rolling Stones. So let me get on to Jeremy. There. Jeremy's going to talk about some of the things that we've learned in the past year from online teaching. And he liked this quote: if you want students to learn English, don't teach language. So I'll let him sort that out later with you all. But in my portion, I want to talk about if you are going to teach English, if you do teach language, how do you teach it? And I'm basically today going to talk about the difference between a teacher-centered clarification, which tends to be lecture-based, and a student-centered clarification, one of which the techniques is called guided discovery. So when we talk about language clarification, as I'm sure most of you know, is that it includes generally information about the meaning of language or a particular structure, the form, which we think of as the grammar rule, and how the structure or the word is pronounced. So meaning, form, and pronunciation are the main elements in clarifying language for students. So what's the difference between a teacher-centered clarification and a student-centered clarification? Well, as the little icon shows, oftentimes in teacher-centered clarification, the teacher is at the board, and it's sort of a lecture style, although most teachers will be eliciting information from the students. But basically, the teacher is at the front of the classroom and explaining things. So just to show an example of this, the first example, we're going to use used to as an example of some language that we might want to teach. So we have a sentence: she used to travel a lot. Well, the first thing we need is some kind of meaningful context for the language that we're teaching. So here's an example that you might find something that I came up with, but also you would find something similar in any course book. So we have Sophie, and in 1970, Sophie is a flight attendant. And if we read about her life at that time, we learn that she travels a lot, she stays in hotels, and she visits famous places. But Sophie is now retired. So here we have three sentences about Sophie. She used to travel a lot, she used to stay in hotels, and she used to visit famous places. So now we have the language that we're teaching in three meaningful sentences from our context. So often the way it goes is the teacher says to the class, used to means she traveled in the past, she traveled many times, but she does not travel now. And then the teacher might ask these questions to see if the students learned what he or she taught. So did she travel in the past? If you all want to type a Y for yes or an N for no in the chat box, just to see if you're awake out there. Great. Yes, she did travel in the past. One time or many times? You can tap yes, many, many, many. Great. And does she travel now? And the students, like you all, are telling me in the chat box, no. So the next thing we might move to is the pronunciation of this language. So in the classroom, as the teacher, I might stand at the front of the room and drill these three example sentences. So I would say, she used to travel a lot. Please repeat. And the students would repeat it a couple of times. Then I would want to go over or explain what we think of as the grammar rules. So here again are my three sentences. And you can see that used to and she, this stays the same. So we have the subject plus used to plus the base verb, and then some information, additional information. Okay, so what's the problem with this teacher-centered clarification? see if I can get Charlie Brown to work for us. So I think you all are probably familiar with the sound of the Charlie Brown teacher voice. Okay, and that's often what is the problem with teacher-centered clarification. We have this idea that Lucy's teacher taught used to, but what did Lucy learn? And it looks as if Lucy was asleep. So we're not sure when we're teaching if our students are actually learning. The second example, the guided discovery example, we'll use the same language. So we're going to talk about used to again. But first, what is guided discovery? So it is an approach to clarifying language. It removes the teacher from the role of explainer or lecturer, which means that the teacher is not at the front of the classroom, but that the teacher is free to monitor the task. How the students
sorry to interrupt, Missy. We can't see your screen at the moment.
Okay, thank you for telling me.
No worries.
Go back to share screen mode. Well, most importantly, did you get to see Charlie Brown? Just lost my controls for Zoom. So give me just 1 second. Okay, how about now? Is it back? Lizzie, are you able to see the screen now? Yes? Okay, cool. All right, so we've seen Charlie Brown. We've talked about the fact that when the teacher's at the front of the classroom, talking for long periods of time.
Sorry, Missy. No, I can't see it actually. Can't see the screen. There you go. Nice one. Thank you. Thank you.
So back to Lucy. Lucy is sleeping and the teacher is teaching. So with student-centered clarification, what we're hoping to avoid is having our students go to sleep or just sort of check out. So we keep them involved in the process. So if we go back to the context of Sophie again, and our same 3 sentences that we were looking at before, she used to travel, she used to stay in hotels, and she used to visit famous places. With a guided discovery example, we would take those 3 sentences and we would put them on a guided discovery worksheet. So on the worksheet, we would want to include the things, the relevant features of this language. So that would include something about the meaning, the form, and the pronunciation. So if you all looked at this, you can see that the information, the questions are the same as the ones I asked before, only this time this is on a worksheet or handout. So I can give this handout to the students and they can work in pairs or groups. And a really well-designed guided discovery task is going to make sure that the questions or the tasks can all be answered by looking at the 3 examples here, what we sometimes call marker sentences. So we would know from the context the answer to number 1, that she did travel in the past many times, but now she does not. If we look at the form in B, The first thing is to circle the verb after used to. So if we look at our 3 sentence and we circle that verb, there's travel, there's stay, and there's visit. And now we are really focused on those 3 words and we can answer the next 2 questions. The first one, does that verb end in S? Well, no, it doesn't. And does it end in ED? No, it does not. So we can circle those 2, and we've shown the students that this verb is the simple base verb. And we've shown them not by explaining, but by getting them to notice something about the language. And in the pronunciation part of clarification, instead of only having students drill the language, we can ask them to listen and to notice things about the pronunciation and to mark the sentences similar to the other tasks. So in the end, the answers would look something like this. So notice that the red underline shows the stressed parts of the sentences. And the students would have listened, done that themselves, and then maybe also done some repeating. So student-centered clarification looks more like this than hopefully Lucy falling asleep. It is a little bit more challenging for the students to figure this stuff out on their own. So it's a good idea to do this in pairs or groups. The other thing is that it definitely takes more time. So one of the things I have found in the last year in the land of breakout rooms is that it's really not worth putting students into breakout rooms for just a couple of minutes. So you want to give them a task that they're going to need to spend some time on when they're in those rooms. So I have found that actually guided discovery works quite well when we put students into small groups in breakout rooms. Then we can monitor the rooms. They have the examples in front of them. And as we said before, if the task is well designed, the answers will be in the examples. Okay, now some course books now these days actually have guided discovery tasks in them. I have noticed that on a lot of CELTA courses, the guided discovery box is there, but sometimes the teachers don't recognize that that's what it is. So they have a tendency to just take that information, put it on the board, and go right back to kind of the teacher-centered clarification and possible sleeping Lucy's in the classroom. So this box looks kind of like just a bunch of grammar rules, but if you look more closely, you can see that the blue sentences, those are 3 example sentences. Well, where did they come from? They came from a reading lesson that was on the previous page. So if you notice, these 2 or 3 sentences are also in the text. So this is a pre-intermediate total English course book, and this is a very nice guided discovery task. So if you notice here, we use the first conditional to talk about something that's possible or impossible. If you look at sentence 1, it says, if models look perfect, magazines will sell more. So this article was about airbrushing models to make them look perfect for magazines. And so from that context, we can guess that the meaning is that it is something that is possible. Theoretically, in the land of models, they can be perfect, or so the magazines think. And then if you look at letter B, you can see that that task, that question is about the form. So in the if clause of these 3 examples, are we going to find the infinitive of the verb or the simple present? So again, if we go back to our examples, you can see in sentence number 2, the she looks good. If she looks good, we know that's the simple present because of that S on the verb. So then we can circle present simple there. Similarly, in Sentence C, it's asking about when do we use the comma. So if you look at sentence 1, there's a comma. If you look at sentence 3, there's a comma, but there is not a comma in sentence 2. So we can ascertain the answer to that question, again, by looking at our examples. And this is what it would look like. Oops, if you were highlighting, some strange highlighting happening there. The commas, and you can see the S there and the comma. So that allows, those examples allow us to answer these questions or these tasks. And that draws students' attention to the relevant aspects of the language that we're teaching. Okay, another example from another course book. This is from American Headway 2. And similarly, we have something they call in their grammar spot. So there's all different names for these little boxes with grammar information in different course books. But we can recognize this as a good guided discovery task because we can find the answers to this task on a text on the previous page, which was a reading lesson about a burglary. And everything, lo and behold, in the story, it all happened in the past tense. So it gave us an opportunity to see not only the 3 that I've underlined, but the text is filled with simple past tense, both regular and irregular verbs. So in our activities, we can find all the answers in the text, and then we can find the answers to the questions below by looking back at what we filled in this task. So we can see that how is the regular past tense formed? If we look at the examples in this section, we can say, oh, it's ED. That's how we form that, and so forth. Now, sometimes the grammar box gives us information that's just like this. It's just some rules. There's nothing for the students to actually do here. It's just information, and we would hope that they would read it, but we would probably guess that maybe not. And if they do, they're not likely to remember it. We can alter this slightly and make a guided discovery task by taking away some information. So we want to take away some information in the rules rather than the examples. We always want to keep the example words because those are the things that should contain the answers. So here's my adapted task. These are the exact rules from the grammar box in the course book, but I've just taken away that little piece of information, which should say add ED. And the students will look at these 2 examples, worked and started, and they can discern what goes in that box. And the same is true for number 2 and number 3. So we're all familiar with that rule about verb ends in a consonant, change the Y to I, add ED, and we can see that that has happened in these 2 words below. So again, we've adapted some grammar information, turned it into a guided discovery activity for the students to do. Okay, so oftentimes people think that you can only use guided discovery with higher levels. So I just wanted to give you a quick example. Even at the literacy level, this is a language that I made up. I call it Minish. And it's a bunch of symbols. Nobody knows this language. So how would you know anything about it? I think that from looking at this example and recognizing some patterns, you can find out about this language. You can probably figure out how many words are in the sentence. If I ask you to circle all of these symbols and how many are there, you can do that. And if I tell you that these symbols are vowels and ask you to underline them, then you're going to be able to figure out what the rule is. Now let's show, here's what the answers look like. And you'll notice that there's a vowel in every word. And that, just like English, we have that rule, there must be a vowel in every word. So just notice that the real principle underlying guided discovery is your ability to get information about the language, looking at examples and recognizing patterns. And that's really what is exciting about it. It will be true about any language that you're trying to learn. So start looking for patterns in that language, and you'll start to learn things, even if you know nothing about the language. Okay, so the pros to guided discovery: it encourages learner autonomy, it develops the skill of noticing patterns. When the students are working together, there's meaningful communication happening, and it's usually thought to be more memorable because the cognitive processing involved gets that information into long-term memory. The cons is that it's time consuming. So if you're going to use it, you'll need to make time for this in your lesson. Some learners don't expect this. They expect the teacher to be at the front talking, like I've been doing for the last 20 minutes. And they are used to having the information spoon-fed. So they have to kind of be eased into this. And it sometimes does require adaptation of coursebook materials. So now, having said that, if you are going to teach language, guided discovery might be an option that you want to explore more. And if you are thinking about maybe it's not that necessary to clarify language in this traditional way of focusing on meaning, pronunciation, and form, hopefully Jeremy Harmer can give you some ideas about that, because I think that's what his talk will be about. So before that, I think Lizzie's going to talk to you all about the Delta. So thank you very much for attending. Really lovely to see some familiar names and faces there.
Awesome. Thanks, Missy. First of all, I'm very sorry about the ding dongs. I have changed the settings. However, it might be too late for this particular meeting, but I think, we're settled that most people are here now. I hope you'll stick around. We've got a few more minutes before we start the info session. So does anyone have any questions or comments for Missy? I didn't see any particular ones in the chat, but let me just have a quick look. There's some thank yous coming in. Awesome. Wonderful.
There's one question from Anne. She's asked,
yeah.
Hold on, I lost it. Let me find it.
Can't we do both? Teach MFP and then do a guided discovery?
That's a good question. The real answer is another question. Why would you need to? Because if you remember in the beginning, we talked about guided discovery is a technique for clarifying language. It is something that teachers often do, but it shouldn't be necessary. You've already done it. You've done it using a student-centered technique rather than a teacher-centered technique. So there shouldn't be a reason to do it again. Sometimes, we can choose to do, for example, you might choose to do meaning and form in a guided discovery way and pronunciation in a teacher-led way. And some language lends itself more to guided discovery for some aspects than others. So it's no problem. You won't be arrested if you do a little of both.
I like that approach, yeah. But it's worth saying that, if the more time you spend or the less time you spend on clarification, the more you've got for practice.
Exactly.
Which is where real depth of learning happens in my opinion. Awesome. Another question here. Would that lesson be workable with irregular verbs? Possibly not. With irregular verbs, you've got to memorize them, I guess. But
yeah, I think irregular verbs are probably a good example of when there isn't a pattern in terms of the form. So if you remember, this principle that underlies guided discovery really has to do with recognizing patterns. So that's a really good question. No, you couldn't for form, but You might for something else. You might have a group of irregular verbs where there is a pattern regarding the pronunciation and certainly the meaning. That's a very good point, though.
Yeah.
Language that has a pattern is what works best for guided discovery.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Missy. It was really useful.